For decades, they glittered beneath the velvet vaults of the crown, untouched, unseen, and whispered about in corridors of power. The royal jewels promised to Catherine were more than ornaments. They were legacy, power, and destiny, but the silence surrounding them has shattered. A move has been made, one that has left Queen Camilla stunned, and the monarchy teetering on the edge of a symbolic civil war. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Royal jewels have never simply been treasures of beauty. They are silent emblems of bloodlines, succession, and sovereign endorsement, passed carefully, intentionally, and only to those who stand at the very heart of monarchy's future. Over generations, they've adorned queens not because they were wives, but because they were chosen, because they embodied the spirit of continuity. That's why what happened next wasn't just shocking, it was unprecedented. Because before Queen Elizabeth left this world, she made a promise that was never meant to be broken. A personal, deliberate, and private vow to Catherine, the Princess of Wales. Not out of obligation, but from admiration. In a moment of rare emotional clarity, the late Queen is said to have singled out specific pieces, a sapphire brooch, a diamond circlet, even the fabled emerald necklace once worn by Queen Mary, and told Catherine they would one day be hers, not through inheritance but through trust, that she would carry them not as borrowed grandeur, but as symbols of a new era. But if royal tradition is steeped in honor, it is also riddled with shadows. Even before the Queen was laid to rest, murmurs had already begun. Camilla's discomfort with the idea of Catherine ascending as the visible embodiment of royal femininity was not subtle. Her smiles were measured, her compliments backhanded, and though she had walked a long road to the throne, she could sense the public's adoration drifting towards the woman who carried none of the scandals, none of the baggage. In the weeks that followed, there were no announcements, no photographs, and no official mentions of the promised heirlooms. The royal vault remained closed, the courtiers silent, but beneath that silence, a quiet defiance took root. William saw it all. He didn't need words. He watched as Camilla's influence over vault access solidified. He noted how inventories changed, how subtle edits to royal protocols began to erase mentions of Catherine as the future holder of Queen Elizabeth's legacy jewels. And yet, he said nothing, not at first. He waited. Because William, trained not only in protocol but in patience, knew that the crown was more than ceremony. It was war, waged in whispers, and sometimes silence could be the sharpest sword. But the Queen was gone. The throne was no longer Elizabeth's. And that silence, once a strategy, was starting to rot from within. For the first time, William could feel it, the foundation cracking. The monarchy wasn't just changing, it was betraying itself. And what began as an internal omission was about to spiral into an external reckoning. Because what the world would soon discover is that promises made by queens do not disappear. They echo, louder and louder, until they can no longer be ignored. But the story didn't begin with inheritance. It began with an oath, whispered between monarchs and buried beneath crowns of quiet deceit. Behind the palace walls, Queen Elizabeth made a decision that would redefine the future of the crown. Not in a speech, not in writing, but in an emotional conversation with Catherine Middleton. The weight of a dying monarch's legacy rested not on Charles or Camilla, but on a young woman with dignity, restraint, and quiet steel. And in that moment, the royal jewels were not just gifted, they were entrusted. It happened at Balmoral, away from the thrones, the advisors, and the formality that wrapped the monarchy like a shroud. The Queen, weary yet unwavering, called for Catherine in the quiet aftermath of a family gathering. No aides, no protocol, just the two of them, a generation apart but bound by the silent burden of legacy. And there, in the stillness of a Highland evening, Elizabeth laid bare her truth. The monarchy, she said, would soon belong to a new kind of queen, one not defined by blood, but by moral clarity, not feared or feared for, but loved. That woman was Catherine, and the crown jewels, specifically the select pieces of regal significance, were to be hers, not merely as accessories, but as anchors to the public trust. Elizabeth's words, though soft, carried the weight of 1,000 years. The jewels represented the soul of the monarchy, and by placing them in Catherine's care, verbally, personally, and emotionally, she was signaling to the future that the true heart of the people's crown beat in Catherine's chest. But there was no paper, no signature, just a monarch's spoken will, and a future queen's solemn silence. And William, though absent from the room, was not absent from the knowledge. Later that evening, when Catherine recounted the conversation in hushed tones, William listened with reverence. He understood what his grandmother had done. She had bypassed bureaucracy and chosen soul over structure. In that moment, Catherine was no longer simply his wife. She was the woman the Queen had trusted with the legacy of a nation. And William, groomed in restraint, nodded once and said nothing more. It was never meant to be made public. That was the elegance of it. A legacy passed not through law but through love. Yet within that secrecy lay the seeds of betrayal. Without documentation, without declaration, this sacred exchange became vulnerable. It became a secret the palace could twist, deny, or erase. And as the months passed, and Elizabeth's absence hardened into silence, the question remained, what becomes of a promise when those who heard it are the only ones left to remember? Because legacy without record is a throne without a crown. And in a palace where power shifts like sand, even the purest oath can turn to dust. That single conversation, once a light in the darkness of transition, would soon become a point of contention so fierce it threatened to unravel the very fabric of royal succession. And while Catherine carried the burden with quiet grace, the storm it birthed would become a reckoning the monarchy could not avoid. And as one queen whispered her legacy, another woman waited in the wings, unaware that the very crown she now wore was promised to another. Camilla was never meant to be queen. That's what the public was told for years. But titles shift, narratives evolve, and suddenly, queen consort turned queen. Behind this quiet elevation was a calculated move, and the gradual erasure of the private vow made to Catherine. And with it, the jewels began to disappear from the conversation, from inventories, and from destiny. In the hours following Queen Elizabeth's funeral, while the nation mourned and eyes turned to King Charles, a quieter storm was already forming behind palace doors. One of the first executive decisions made under the new reign was deceptively subtle, a small change to formal titles, wording, and ceremonial documentation. The reference to Queen Consort Camilla began to shrink, omitted from public statements and royal communiques. In its place, a bolder, starker term emerged, the Queen. The shift was swift, calculated, not announced but absorbed. It wasn't a mistake, it was a message. The new monarch was clearing the path for Camilla, not just as a companion, but as a central figure of reign, status, and influence, and it did not go unnoticed. As the public attempted to reconcile the sudden elevation of a woman long considered controversial, another story was quietly being rewritten. The future role of Catherine, the one that Queen Elizabeth had personally envisioned, endorsed, and whispered into being, began to vanish from the narrative. Mentions of the future Queen Catherine were quietly pulled from archived media, edited out of event briefs, and left out of future planning documentation within the royal household. What had once been celebrated as an inevitable passing of the torch now looked like a closed door, and it was no accident. Behind the scenes, the old guard, the so-called men in grey suits, advisors, strategists, legacy protectors were at work. Their goal was clear: consolidate authority around Camilla before public affection could harden around Catherine. Camilla, despite years of rehabilitation, still bore the scars of public mistrust. To preserve her image, they would need to diminish the next in line, soften Catherine's image not by scandal, but by silence. In that quiet campaign, the most powerful symbols were not words, but jewels. One by one, heirlooms believed to be designated for Catherine were checked out of vaults, loaned, redirected. In some cases, simply removed from record. No ceremony, no announcement, just disappearance. It was, to all appearances, a royal vanishing act. Inside William's circle, alarm turned into unease. The pieces Catherine had been promised, the ones chosen by his grandmother, were not merely missing, they were being worn, reintroduced into Camilla's rotation. Pieces the public had not seen in years now gleamed at state banquets and royal dinners. William said nothing publicly, But behind closed doors, he began asking questions. Who authorized the transfers? Where were the ledger entries? Why was Catherine's name, once written in trust, now absent from every record? The breach was clear. What had once been sacred was now political, and what had once been destiny was now being rewritten in real time. But William wasn't ready to accept erasure. Not of his wife, not of his grandmother's final will, and certainly not of a future that had already been promised. He understood the monarchy better than anyone, and he knew when the past is erased, the future becomes a battlefield. But secrets can't stay buried forever, not when the air begins to move, and Prince William was about to do the unthinkable. He waited, watched, and when the line was crossed, Prince William acted, not as a son, not as a prince, but as the future king. What began as a private confrontation would soon spiral into a confrontation that shook palace tradition. William's ultimatum was simple: return what was promised, or face a royal reckoning. The silence could no longer be mistaken for consent. What had once been overlooked in the name of decorum had now become impossible to ignore. The jewels, once intended for Catherine, were being paraded before the world on a different neck. The final straw wasn't a necklace or a brooch, it was betrayal. And William, trained his entire life to suppress emotion, could no longer hold it back. He summoned senior palace advisors, the men in grey suits, men who had orchestrated transitions, managed crises, and buried scandals. But what they saw this time was different. William wasn't asking for approval, he was demanding answers. Why were pieces clearly marked for his wife now part of Camilla's collection? Who signed off on their release? Where was the record of the Queen's wishes? The room was quiet, measured, tense. But beneath William's calm tone was fury, cold, righteous, and immovable. The advisors stumbled. They offered platitudes, procedural explanations, suggestions of misinterpretation. But William wasn't interested in their damage control. He invoked the oath, the one his grandmother had made to Catherine, a private but deliberate covenant that had been violated. He spoke not as a grieving grandson, but as the rightful protector of legacy. Then, in a voice that left no room for doubt, he gave his warning: either the heirlooms are returned, or he would bring the matter to the public. The monarchy would not survive another scandal, he said, but neither would it survive another betrayal of the people's trust. Word of the confrontation reached Camilla within hours, and what followed was a meeting that would alter the internal power balance of the royal family. William and Camilla alone. No advisors, no witnesses. Two individuals separated by generation, ideology, and blood. She tried to deflect at first, insisting that decisions had been made on her behalf, that she had merely worn what was available. But William wasn't moved by excuses. He reminded her of the oath, of what the Queen herself had promised, and of how that promise was not just personal, but prophetic. Camilla, sharp and seasoned, fired back. She reminded him that she was queen, that she had earned her place through endurance and sacrifice. But William interrupted her with words that stunned even her. You may wear the crown, but it was never meant to be yours alone. The confrontation was not just about jewelry, it was about power, about lineage, about respect. And for William, it was deeply, achingly personal. Catherine had never asked for anything. She had played her role with grace, poise, and patience. And now, she was being erased from the very future she had helped to protect. William would not allow it. He would not let his wife be reduced to a footnote beneath another woman's reign. Not when the promise was clear, not when the public's heart already beat for her. The confrontation with Camilla ended without resolution, but with a shift in the air. She saw it now. The boy she once viewed as quiet and pliable was gone. In his place stood a man who would inherit not just a title, but the throne. And this man was not afraid to protect what was sacred, not through tradition, but through force of will. Camilla was shaken, but not defeated, and what followed was a power struggle cloaked in courtesy, dripping in venom. Within the palace walls, war was never declared, but it was waged in silence. Behind smiles at state banquets and floral arrangements at Windsor lay the tension of a family fractured. Prince William wanted justice. Camilla wanted control. And at stake, the most sacred symbols of queenship, and the woman the public truly adored. The confrontation may have taken place behind closed doors, but the tremors it left behind rippled through the palace like a coming storm. William's ultimatum had broken the veil of civility, and what followed was a masterclass in subtle warfare, one where every movement, every whisper, every glance was calculated. Leaks began surfacing in the press. Anonymous tips to seasoned royal correspondents. Hints of tension. Phrases like missing heirlooms, vanished promises, unrecorded legacies. The tabloids lit up with speculation. Some framed it as a family dispute. Others dug deeper, hinting at betrayal, favoritism, even a secret war for the crown's heart. But none dared speak the full truth. Not yet. Inside the palace, alliances were being tested. Camilla, shaken but not cornered, turned to Charles. Their meetings became longer, colder, more urgent. She urged him to step in, to silence the drama before it exploded. Charles, torn between loyalty to his wife and the unspoken weight of his mother's intentions, tried to broker calm, but his hesitation spoke louder than his words. Camilla, sensing the king's reluctance, took matters into her own hands. She doubled down on her presence, appearing at more events, more photo ops, draped in the very jewels now at the center of controversy. It wasn't just a statement, it was defiance, glittering and strategic. William, however, was not idle. He began to speak, not to the press, but to the people who mattered, the royal staff, the wardrobe keepers, the vault clerks, the protocol officers, those who had seen the ledgers, the boxes, the signatures. Quietly, discreetly, loyalties began to shift. Some remembered Elizabeth's instructions, others had witnessed the jewels being reassigned under questionable circumstances, and a few were willing to talk, not publicly, but to William. He was building a case, not with headlines, but with memory, detail, and evidence, and through it all, Catherine remained silent, not out of weakness, but out of strength. She bore the weight of the betrayal with the same grace that once won the late Queen's heart. But behind closed doors, she was hurting. The woman who had been chosen, honored, and promised a future now found herself erased, her name absent from records, her legacy placed on another's shoulders. Her suffering wasn't loud, but it was deep. And William saw it. Every time she smiled for the cameras, he saw it. Every time she nodded at Camilla across a dining table, he saw it. And that pain only fueled his resolve. Meanwhile, the media, now tipped off by whispers and well-timed sightings, began asking questions. Where were the pieces that had been absent from royal circulation for years? Why had they resurfaced now, and on whom? And why had Queen Elizabeth's final wishes, so often referenced, so rarely documented, suddenly gone missing from all official history? The narrative was slipping from the palace's grip, and history, as it so often does, began echoing through the halls, because this wasn't the first time an heir had challenged a monarch's inner circle, and it wouldn't be the last. But as the feud escalated, the past returned, with receipts, with proof, and with the full weight of Elizabeth's shadow. They thought it was buried. They thought no one would know. But royal vaults keep records, and someone kept a copy. When a mysterious vault ledger surfaced, detailing what Queen Elizabeth set aside for Catherine, it wasn't just a scandal, it was proof, and it shattered everything the palace had tried to suppress. The document was never supposed to see daylight. Dated quietly in 2019, stamped with the royal crest and marked internal eyes only, it was a vault inventory few even knew existed. But someone had it, someone who had seen the growing storm, the growing silence, and decided the truth could no longer stay hidden. An anonymous envelope arrived at the office of a mid-tier journalist known for royal exposés. No name, no return address, just a crisp copy of the original vault records, meticulously itemized and shockingly clear. Multiple pieces were listed with one unmistakable annotation, designated for future Queen Catherine, per HM's directive. Among the items were some of the most iconic heirlooms of the Windsor lineage, pieces unseen for years, presumed in storage or transition. But the world quickly realized many were not in storage. They were in use. Camilla had been photographed in several of the exact items: bracelets, brooches, a tiara that hadn't been worn since Elizabeth's Golden Jubilee. The overlap wasn't coincidental, it was deliberate, and now it was undeniable. the leak detonated across headlines like thunder. The hidden ledger, Catherine's promised jewels worn by Camilla, Elizabeth's will, betrayed. News outlets from London to New York, from tabloids to primetime, everyone wanted a piece of the story. For the first time, the royal silence cracked. Clarence House issued a carefully worded denial, calling the document unverified. But the public didn't buy it. The language was too soft, too rehearsed. Social media erupted with fury. Support for Catherine surged. Camilla's name trended for all the wrong reasons. And behind palace walls, panic turned to paralysis. Inside William's camp, the mood was different. They had seen the document long before the press. In fact, the moment it surfaced, it was handed over to one of his closest aides. Within hours, it was authenticated. Signatures matched, inventory codes aligned. The handwriting, Queen Elizabeth's notes in the margins, was unmistakable. This wasn't a forgery, this was real. And it proved everything William had said. Everything Catherine had endured. Everything the Queen had intended. When Catherine saw the document, she reportedly wept, not because of anger, not because of loss, but because for the first time since her silence had been mistaken for surrender, she was vindicated. Her dignity, so often invisible to those intoxicated by power, had been acknowledged in black and white. The legacy she had been entrusted with hadn't been imagined, it had been stolen. The palace, scrambling for damage control, found itself cornered. Charles remained silent. Camilla cancelled 2 appearances, citing fatigue. But fatigue wasn't the issue, exposure was. The monarchy had been caught rewriting its own history, and now the ink was bleeding into the public eye. Calls grew for an internal investigation. Parliament murmured about oversight. The crown was under siege, not by revolution but by receipts. And through it all, William stood steady. He didn't speak to the press. He didn't need to. The proof had spoken for him. His enemies had underestimated him. They had forgotten the strength of a man raised in the shadow of tragedy, trained in diplomacy, and now pushed into war. He would not let this betrayal define the future of the throne. And what he planned next wouldn't just be an act of reclamation, it would be a redefinition of monarchy itself. The leak changed everything. But what William did next would be remembered as a moment that redefined royal bloodlines. It wasn't televised, it wasn't announced. But behind palace walls, Prince William stood before the royal vault and reclaimed what was rightfully his wife's. No press, no photographers, just history, justice, and the shimmer of a promise finally fulfilled. And when Catherine wore those jewels again, the message was clear. The crown had a new heart. The storm had broken, the veil lifted, and the court of public opinion had roared louder than the gilded silence of Buckingham's walls. And when all attempts to bury the truth failed, William moved, not with spectacle, but with finality. The decision was made in a single conversation, one known only to a few. William would take back what had been promised, not as a show of dominance, but as an act of correction. It was not revenge, it was resolution. Within Windsor's fortified vaults, a short and private ceremony took place, quiet, deliberate, and stripped of royal pretense. Camilla did not attend, nor did Charles. This was between William, the legacy of his grandmother, and the woman she had chosen to carry it forward. The vault clerk stood at attention as William reviewed the records, this time, not the falsified ones, but the original ledger. The same one that had surfaced in the press, now verified, confirmed, and brought into the light. Piece by piece, he authorized the return. The sapphire drop earrings, the emerald choker, the diamond bracelet Elizabeth had once worn on her coronation night. And finally, her favorite, the tiara she had privately told Catherine would one day rest on her head, not because of tradition, but because of grace. William signed the release, and history shifted in that moment, not in spectacle, but in stillness. When Catherine first held them again, no words were spoken. She simply looked at her husband, eyes shimmering with something deeper than pride. It was not about jewels, it never had been. It was about dignity restored, about a vow finally honored. And in that quiet exchange, the royal family's narrative bent, ever so slightly, toward justice. It wasn't Catherine who demanded the crown. It was the people who saw it already belonged to her. But silence doesn't last in the digital age. Staff who had long kept their heads down began to speak, quietly at first, then louder. The story made its way into the press. Vault reclamation, they called it. The promise delivered, and the headline that captured the world's attention was the one that rang with poetic finality. A queen in waiting, no longer waiting. The world watched as Catherine stepped into the public eye, wearing the pieces once lost to quiet betrayal. No statements, no revenge, just presence and power, the kind of power that doesn't need to announce itself to be felt. And while the public applauded and Camilla receded from the spotlight, a deeper question stirred just beneath the surface, one that would not fade with ceremony or spectacle. But one final question remained. What did King Charles really know, and why did he stay silent all along? He watched the battle unfold, he heard the whispers, and yet he remained silent. King Charles, the man once denied the woman he loved, now stood between his wife and his son. But in his silence, did he protect peace, or betray the memory of his mother? This was the monarch's most human moment, and his most haunting failure. From the moment the storm began to brew, Charles knew where the winds were blowing. He had seen the tension creep into his son's eyes, heard the steel in William's voice, and sensed the growing shadow of his mother's unspoken wishes. And still he did nothing, not because he didn't care, but because he cared too much about everything and everyone. Caught in the impossible balance of past, present, and legacy, Charles became a man ruled by hesitation. Camilla, the woman for whom he had once waged a decades-long war against public scorn, now stood accused of dismantling his mother's final intention. William, his own blood, was pushing back against not just Camilla, but the very institution Charles had spent his life trying to stabilize. The cost of intervention was too high, so he chose stillness. But that stillness spoke volumes. Behind closed doors, those closest to the king whispered of restlessness, of a man who no longer slept deeply, of long walks alone in the gardens, of sudden requests for Elizabeth's old letters, her portraits, her private recordings. As the scandal spiraled, Charles withdrew, not just from confrontation, but from clarity. His advisors, fearful of a public fracture between monarch and heir, urged neutrality. They told him to trust the palace's machinery, to let it pass. But what they never understood was that this wasn't just politics, it was personal, it was legacy, and it was unraveling in front of him. The tension with William reached its peak when the vault ledger went public. The evidence was there, laid bare for the world. Charles offered no condemnation, no defense, just a carefully constructed silence. And in that silence, the weight of his choices crushed the image of a king once seen as steady. To Catherine, the man she had once viewed as an elder statesman of grace and quiet dignity, now looked like a shadow. She had once respected his restraint, but now it felt like abandonment. In the end, the king was neither villain nor victim. He was a man who had waited his entire life for the throne, only to realize that power without moral clarity was just a gilded cage. He could not protect both his past and his future, and by trying to protect both women he loved, his mother's memory and his wife's pride, he failed the one who had asked for neither. But legacies aren't just built in silence. Sometimes they're carved in defiance, and Catherine was ready to carry hers forward. She never raised her voice, never demanded a throne, but Catherine didn't need a crown to claim her place in history. The jewels now rested with her, not as trophies but as truth. She became the living symbol of grace under fire, and in the hearts of the people, she wore the only title that mattered, Queen. When the dust settled, there was no announcement, no official decree. But something in the air had changed. The world had watched Catherine endure the unthinkable, silently, patiently, and with unwavering dignity. She had been sidelined, erased, tested, and yet she never broke. Where others wielded influence through whispers and power plays, Catherine's strength came from something far rarer, restraint. And it was that quiet power that captivated not just Britain, but the world. Across continents, social media feeds turned into streams of admiration. Op-eds praised her as the future the monarchy needed, not the one it expected. Hashtags declared her the rightful heir to the Queen's legacy, not by bloodline but by spirit. This wasn't sympathy, it was solidarity. Then came the moment that sealed it, a charity event unassuming in its purpose, but unforgettable in its symbolism. As cameras rolled, Catherine stepped forward in a simple ensemble, and pinned delicately to her chest was Queen Elizabeth's signature brooch. The same brooch she had worn during her final televised address. The crowd stilled. Commentators stopped mid-sentence. There was no need for a statement. That one piece, long considered lost to Camilla's collection, was now where it belonged. The message was thunderous in its silence. The heirloom had returned not to the vaults, but to its rightful heir. And through that brooch, Catherine spoke a truth no crown could. In the weeks that followed, the shape of the monarchy began to evolve. Camilla's public presence, once frequent and carefully orchestrated, began to fade. Fewer appearances, toned-down engagements, a silent retreat, marked not by scandal, but by surrender. The power she had tried to secure through proximity to tradition had slipped quietly into irrelevance. Because tradition had shifted. No longer draped in rigidity and hierarchy, the new face of the monarchy was softer, stronger, and more human. It smiled with compassion, walked with humility, and wore its history not as armor, but as purpose. And at the center of it all stood Catherine, not with a crown, but with conviction, not with declarations, but with presence. She never needed to ascend. The world had already placed her there. In playgrounds and parlors, in headlines and history books, Catherine became something more than royal. She became enduring. Because when a storm tried to erase her, she didn't resist it with thunder. She endured it with stillness. And in doing so, she became everything the crown was meant to be, not bound by blood, but bound by promise. The jewels were never just about power. They were about promise. And now, as one queen fades quietly into the background, another rises, not with a coronation, but with quiet fire and undeniable grace. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.